So why are we doing assessments? Assessments are always given to you to give you the opportunity to express your understanding of what you're learning. So demonstrating your understanding via the assessments. Then we give you this mark, 60%, 70%, 50%, whatever it is. And then that's what goes towards your degree. Okay. And it's important when you're demonstrating your understanding that to do that, then perhaps understanding your module learning outcomes becomes important. And we will look at those learning outcomes because they always relate to the assessment. Because the assessment relates to the module, it will relate to the module learning outcomes. And also that all of this helps you, as I say, frame your assessment. So it absolutely uncovers what it is precisely that you've been asked to do. So you have a question, but when you look at the question and the learning outcomes between the two, then you have a really good understanding of what's involved. Okay. So, yeah, so we're going to look at understanding the question, the types of question, you know, the fact that there are 3 elements to a question: task, words, topic, focus. That there are little things, small things with big implications, little words or comment or things that can be added into a question that you might skip over, but in actual fact, you have to pay close attention to. And then how at the end of all of that, once you understand the question, then you create more questions. And that's what allows you to access developing an answer. That's what allows you to answering those further questions. I'll make sense of that when I get to it. And then how you'll do reading, planning in a kind of in a cycle rather than you do the reading and you do the planning. Okay. So yeah, very briefly, before when you were answering a question, and I want you to make this key difference, before when you were asked a question at college or you were given a question at school, secondary, whatever, you could basically, the marker is looking to you to mention certain things, literally talk about this, talk about this, talk about this, talk about this, and we'll give you marks for that. And everybody goes home happy. So you're thinking about recalling. But at university, the difference is the question is too particular for you to randomly throw stuff in as an answer. So there's, you know, sometimes you say in an exam when you're stuck, what I did was I wrote everything I knew. I just wrote everything down and hoped that I would get marks. It's just that that's not going to work here. And sometimes when people write the accident, it's not on purpose, but accidentally they don't write the relevant stuff to the question. So they'll put stuff in the essay and it doesn't get them any marks because it's not relevant. It's part of the module. It may be part of the general gist of what we've been asked to do, but there are things in the question that are too specific to allow you to talk about everything. So by accident, you may put in stuff that's not relevant. And of course, relevance is one of the key things in academic writing. So understanding the question is the key to making everything you write as relevant as possible. Therefore, ticking that box in terms of the 5 things. Okay. So the first thing we're going to look at is task words. You know, they shape an assessment. They're instructions that influence the content and the structure of an essay or a report. I believe we will be talking about a report here, but any piece of academic writing, it influences it. So let's look at some. and there's a few. Holy moly, we have to put them. There's many. We have to put them in alphabetical order, right? And I'm just going to skip forward to the next slide and say there's 2 pages and we've not even got to E yet. Or we've just got to E, sorry. Right, so there's one I want to identify here. Or basically, I just want to say that these are all different, right? Compare, identify the similarities and differences. Sorry, let me get my... Identify the similarities and differences. So that's comparing, which is different from assess, which is to weigh up to what extent something is true, which is different to clarify, which is literally making something clearer and, where appropriate, simplify. So if you're asked to clarify rather than compare, you're doing something different in the essay. So the whole vibe of the essay changes. So you've got to look at the task word, you've got to identify the task word, and then which is basically what have you been asked to do. So I'll move on to the next one. Critically evaluate is one. Sorry, I just want to briefly go back to this one. So what I do is I've simplified compare, and I've identified that when I see the word compare, immediately my mind jumps to similarities and differences. How are these two things or three things or however many things, how are they similar and how are they different? So, the difference between a car and a bus. A car and a bus are similar because they're modes of transport. They transport people. The differences are one's carries a lot more people than the other one. It's run as a business. The other one is much smaller and it's privately owned generally. So that's it. Similarities and differences. Critically evaluate is, give your verdict as to what extent a statement or findings within a piece of research are true, or to what extent you agree with them. Okay, so you're asked to critically evaluate something. Provide evidence that both agrees and contradicts an argument. Come to a final. But my shorthand for this is, when I see critically evaluate, I just see give something a score out of 10 with words. So I would say, if I agree with something, I would give it 9 out of 10. If I didn't like it, I would give it 1 out of 10. And again, for that, with that in mind, I would like you in the chat box. I'm going to ask you 2 questions about something, and I want you to give me that score out of 10 for each question. So the first question is, how well do you think the NHS has coped with, or the staff, how well have the staff in the NHS dealt with COVID so far? If you were to give them the staff of the NHS a score out of 10, what would you give them for the work they've put in for COVID? And that's all I'm looking for, you to type in a number. Right, 9, 10. Okay, brilliant. So 10 out of 10, difficult job, unprecedented. So there you go. And thanks, Sheila. And Sheila's put in the reason, which is a justification for it. And that's it. So if you were doing an essay, you would drop the 10 out of 10 bit, but you would just put in the written part where you say it's a difficult job in unprecedented circumstances. But you're right, 10 out of 10. Now, here's another thing. So the other thing is there's general agreement. Everybody's giving them a high score because generally we can all agree on roughly how it's been and how well they've done. It's obvious from the news, from what we've read in the papers. We can gather evidence. We're not just saying 9 or 10 out of nowhere, but we have evidence for it. So the next question is, how well do you think the Conservative government, Boris Johnson in particular, how well do you think they've handled the pandemic? A score out of 10. Complete agreement that you don't give them any marks. So they've made, arguably what you're saying with that is they've made a complete arse of it almost every step of the way, which it'd be difficult to disagree with. And you could get all the things and you could get the evidence and you could do that. So that, So critical evaluation, that is basically what it is. We can all do it. We can all do it based on, but when we ask you to critically evaluate, which is one of the most common assessments at university, it's the same thing, but it's the evidence you have to work out, rather than it being something that's, the examples I've given you, you've been immersed in, you've been given that evidence through the news, through newspapers and everything all the time. So it's been easy to do, but for this, you're going to have to develop that understanding of whether something's a good thing, a positive thing, an effective thing, or it's a negative, damaging, causes problems type thing. But it's basically giving something a score out of 10 with words rather than with numbers. So when you write the essay, if you write the essay about the NHS staff, that essay is going to be full of positives with maybe some negatives, because that's the way it breaks down. You will try and find the positives and the negatives, but the positives will far outweigh. And then when you do the thing about the Tory government, arguably, it's going to be full of negatives with very few positives. So, and there's other ones. And I think what the next slide said is, the thing is that you have to understand them. You could Google task words or university task words or essay task words, and you'll get lots of different versions with different meanings. The important thing is to understand one, and like I think, always try and get your own meaning. So I'm similarities and differences. I'm a score of 9 out of 10 in words, and then that helps me, and then I can locate them. Okay. So there's a couple of other words that sometimes sneak their way into questions, and one is you might say comment. You might get the question that says, discuss the performance of the Tory government on the pandemic and comment on their actions. Now that comment, all I'm saying is that comment is not, it's not a descriptive comment. It's an evaluation. So it's an assessment. So it's comment it's did they do it good? Did they do it bad? Yeah, they got this wrong, they got this wrong, they got this wrong. That's your comment. It's not, when you say comment on the government, it's not say, well, there's 600 MPs and they all go to the House of Commons. For me, that comment is like, that's where they're telling you to do a critical analysis, but they're doing it in a very subtle way. Right, illustrate just means use examples. So what's your examples? Well, they didn't do this, they didn't shut down, they didn't do this, they didn't do that. They were wasteful. And here's an example. Also around theory, you can use examples. So you might have a theory that says social marketing is becoming more common. And then you give an example of something happening on Twitter or Facebook that reflects that. And that's an example of some other comment. So make sure every word is considered. So now what I want to do is look at task words and questions. And we've discussed two of them. So compare and contrast the 3 dimensions of power identified by Stephen Lukes in terms of their potential to influence this political sphere. So I've picked out the task words first here. So you've got, compare and contrast, which we know similarities and differences. And then we've got this middle one, which is to what extent do you agree with this statement? In other words, how true is it? Now, that, funnily enough, it's not that different from a critical evaluation. It's just a different way of doing it. So when it says, to what extent do you agree with it? You could only come to that opinion if you've critically evaluated it and found out if it's true or not. So the fact that the comment, to what extent, always follows a statement. So the statement here is an assertion, it's a claim. The Gallic revival was the most important factor in advancing separatist nationalism. So all you have to do is to say, well, where's all the evidence that it was the most important factor? And where's the evidence that something else was more important or that was not as important? And then once you've done all of that, you can say, in the essay, you can say, by the evidence provided, it is fairly clear or obvious that it was the most important factor or it wasn't the most. And that's, to me, it's another way of saying critically evaluate, but it's understanding that to what extent do you agree with, you've got to work out how true something is. And it's usually a statement. The third one is the critically evaluate. So it's this 9 out of 10, sorry, 9 out of 10. Give a score out of 10 for the direct and indirect effects of Donald Trump's executive order, blah, blah, blah. So this one, we're given a 9 out of 10. Sorry, we're given a score out of 10. Why do I keep saying 9 out of 10? We give a score out of 10 for that. So then we're going to look at the next part. Now, the next part is the topic of the question. So that's the topic of the question is a bigger thing. So all questions have this big thing. So the big thing in the question is, part of this question is the 3 dimensions of power identified by Stephen Lukes. Now, you don't need to understand what that was. You don't, I'm not asking you, we're not going to look at that, but I'm just saying that's the big bit. And I'm able to establish that that's the topic and that's important. So that will have play some part in your answer. And then the next one for question 2, it's the Gaelic or Gaelic revival, which is the big topic, the big thing. And then for the third one, I think it's Donald Trump's executive order is the big thing to be talked about. So these are the things that are the kind of bigger things that have to be talked about. And these, generally the topic in a question is a topic in the module. It may relate to a lecture or a couple of lectures or a group of lectures, but there'll be this big thing. So for you, it might be garment construction, it may be fashion trends, it may be something like that, but it's that kind of general topic. So identify that so you know that's the kind of the general area that this essay or whatever is going to, or this report or whatever is going to be in. But then the next one is the focus. Now the focus pinpoints the thing that makes the question more specific. And it's what I call it frames it. So it says that although we're talking about the 3 dimensions of power of the Gaelic revival of Donald Trump, the thing is, the important bit is one, its potential to influence the political sphere. So the first question, we're only comparing, contrasting these things in the way that they influence politics. No other way. Nothing else they do is important. Nothing else is relevant. Okay. When we talk about the Gaelic revival, we're not necessarily getting into any great detail about the revival itself, but the question is specifically asking, was it the most important factor? Was it the thing that drove on separatist nationalism or not? Some people say it did, some people didn't say it. What do you think? And then for the next one, when we talk about this, it's Donald Trump's executive order. And to give you a little bit of background, this was when Donald Trump kind of basically banned people from foreign countries coming to the US. And this question is not asking when he banned them, how many people he banned them, but what he's saying, what they're asking here is what were the direct and indirect effects of it on America, on the people traveling? What were the direct and indirect effects of this travel ban? So that's a focus. So there's always a focus in a question you should look out for that says, if you talk about other stuff about the things in blue, the topics, they may not be relevant to the question and may not get you marks because the question will always have a specific point that makes it. That's what we're looking at. Enterprise and behavior for business professionals. This is basically, as far as I can make out, this is a question. Now, to be honest with you, you've got a whole bunch of stuff in it. And I'm actually going to go through quite a bit. But all of the information you've been given is very useful. So look at it all. But when we're trying to uncover it, we're trying to simplify what you've been asked to do. And we're also trying to establish. So this is quite a convoluted question. No harm to the person that wrote it. But for me, the things you've been asked to do are one, you've been asked to engage, and it's a live case study. The second thing is you've been asked to build a portfolio. And arguably, the other thing is you've been asked to use a portfolio template. So these are things that you know you have to do. You're building a portfolio and you're engaging with a live case study. But the big thing is, or the precise thing is evidence of your learning. For me, the topic of the question is a live case study, because the live case study is where everything comes from, okay? So you look at a live case study, it says, which provides evidence of your learning. Your portfolio should include, and this is where a bit I've got, using examples, evidence of your knowledge and skills from lectures, seminars, tutorials, activities, individuals and group work. So this assessment very much works by examples. You're continually asking to find examples to prove that you've got evidence of your learning, okay? So you've got evidence from, and this evidence comes from all these things. So this is, all I'm saying is, you can tell from this, you're going to be looking to have a lot of examples. Right? Now, the good thing is the report has been broken down into 4 parts. I can't go over this. So here's section 1. And in section one, you're supposed to, right, what have you been asked to do? Critically examine, okay? The topic of the question, the big general thing is, right, so critically examine business issues and challenges in societal, organizational, or professional settings. So in other words, what are the things going on in the case study? And the other one is pertinent to their own degree context. And that's the thing, that when you look at these issues, you're only looking for the issues that are relevant to your own degree. So that's the focus. So if you tend to talk about business issues and challenges that are not to do with your degree context or what you've been asked to do, then you may not get the marks from it. However, if I was to simplify section 1, if you understand that section 1 is the New Start Highland, that's the case study, that's the organization, it's a case study. This thing is, what is right and wrong with New Start? What are they getting right and what are they getting wrong? What are they doing well? What are they not doing so well? In other words, what are the business issues? Positive issues and negative issues. What are the challenges in these areas? Okay, so what are they getting right and wrong to do with these areas? So that, for me, is the simple question for me that allows me to start to unpack it and then ask more questions. So the first thing is, you have to establish all the things that are going on. What are the issues? What are the challenges? What are they finding difficult? What are they doing well? And you have to find them out first. And the other thing is, of course, that these are things that are happening externally and societal, things that are happening to the organization itself, and then things that are happening to the professionals or the staff within it. What are the staff issues? What are the organizational issues? And what are the external forces, challenges, etc. Okay, but it's basically, so when I come away with that, the first thing is, once I've written this section, basically it's going to tell me what's right and wrong with it. Okay, and that links to the next one, because the next one is, so if there are issues in New Start Highland, what is needed to fix it? That's what comes from this. And I've jumped to that to see that there's a link. So if you go to the previous slide, the first section says what's wrong, and the next bit, my argument, is what's needed to fix it. But let's look at that in more detail, because it asks you to critically apply, okay? And critically apply just means, for me, that just means use something to assess something. So it's like use a measure of some kind to see how well somebody's doing. Critically apply, so using what the program specific knowledge is, try and create ideas and workable solutions that respond to the challenges. So the topic is you've to try and create things that will sort out these issues and challenges. But the important thing is that the challenges you create and the responses you have program-specific knowledge and are underpinned by the core values of GCU. The ideas you come up with have to be about the two focuses. One is they have to be underpinned by the core values of integrity, creativity, responsibility, and confidence, and they have to be program specific. So the third part of this, in this case, this report is show what could be used to fix it. So you have to come up with things, and then you have to demonstrate a developed understanding and application of a range of business processes and tools. So in other words, you've got to show us what you would actually do to fix it. You've come up with solutions, but those solutions have to be applied in business processes and tools, the actual things you would use on the ground to make that thing work. So that would be the first part. And I'd say show what could be used to fix it. And that's the third part. And then section 4. So the final one, you've been asked to critically assess yourself, knowledge and skills. So where you are in line with graduate attributes. In other words, what a graduate should be. So you have to self-evaluate. Generally, the topic of the question is how has your knowledge and skills advanced in line with graduate attributes? And that's what I've said. So what have you learned about yourself during this process? And then the last thing is what GCU graduate attributes do you have or need develop? So I have simplified this question into these two kind of questions that I can work with. Here's the lecture list, and there'll be lectures here that I say I need to go to these lectures to make sure, because these are relevant to what I'm doing. I'm making connections between these, and I need to go to these to make sure I'm doing it. So if you go to the lectures that you can be super attentive and lectures that you think are going to help you answer those questions. Put it this way, if you keep the question in mind or the questions you have in mind when you're in lectures, a bell will go off in your head when you say, that's something I can use in this. This is part of the answer. This is the part of the knowledge I've got to understand. This is something I need. And then you can start to pull those stuff out. So certain lectures, perhaps more than others, are going to be really useful to you. And if you've looked at the question and you understand the question because you know what you're trying to answer, and if you've simplified that question, like I've said, like I'm just trying to think of one. Yeah, GCU graduate attributes. I don't know where that would be, but maybe say that's under creativity or innovation. Yeah, that's two of the things of, sorry, if I go back to the, active global citizenship, entrepreneurial mindset, leadership and confidence. There might be something in that there you go, entrepreneurial growth and development. That's lecture 9 is going to be really helpful with that part of it. So I'm definitely going to go in and I'm going to be, hopefully as I'm listening to the lecture, I'm going to be, that's something. And it will be really useful to me. So all I'm this point is just to say that suddenly lectures will mean more, which is if you're going into a lecture saying, I hope I find out this, that, and the next thing, or you've got a question on a piece of paper that says, what are the things that do this, or how can I do this, or what should happen here, or what are the processes I might need to use, then suddenly everything that the lecture says means something to you because you can apply it. It really helps. It really helps when you're trying to start to do your assessment, right? So let's develop our plan by creating more questions. So if I go back through this again and go to this one, immediately, if the question here is, what graduate attributes do you have or do you need to have developed? the first question I'm asking, what are these attributes? I need to know them in detail. You know, active and global citizenship. Well, that's okay, but what does that mean? What's behind an entrepreneurial mindset? You have to start unpacking these things. And then once you've unpacked it and you understand it, then you can understand what you have and what you don't have. I mean, what have you learned about yourself in this process? You might ask, the first question is, well, what have I supposed to have learned? What are the possible things I could have learned? So you look through and you say, I'm supposed to have learned this, I'm supposed to have learned that. Have I? And do I understand it? And then do I have these attributes? So it's very much, you start to build questions off of the first. I'm trying to see if there's anything else. Yeah, a range of business processes and tools. What are they? So one thing I'd be like, what are those business processes? What are these tools? Trying to work out what would be the best ones and which ones you would think about but you wouldn't use, which ones wouldn't work, and why. And when you ask those types of questions, then everything's starting to, when you answer those questions, you have something to put in your essay or your report. You've got to write about a range of things and why they are the best things to use. What makes them, why would you use them is as important as using them. Making the right decision is something, but actually doing that's another, I think. Okay. And then that's when you start reading. So you've been to the lectures, you've got the big question laid out, you've got smaller questions you have, and you start reading to answer those questions. You start reading and saying, what are those processes? And then you can start to plan, because when you read, it gives you answers and you say, there are 5 processes I could use. That's great. But then you might read something. Then when you've planned, you might come up with something else, and then you have to go back to the reading, and then you have to read more, and that develops your plan. But as your plan develops, again, you might have more. So all I'm saying is, it's not like you read and then you plan and then that's it all over. To me, you're kind of tweaking and make small adjustments to your plan as you read, and then one feeds the other. And you might find something new. You'll always be kind of keeping an eye out to see if you can find another, the most appropriate journal articles, the most appropriate books. So you're always keeping that eye out, and you might find something else and you might read more. So it's not a linear process, it's a cycle you kind of go round.